At the time I produced this video, I've been a part of scouting for a little over 40 years. And over those 40 years, as a youth and later as an adult, I would either directly participate in or be very closely related to 7 scouting crews that have gone backpacking. Most of those backpacking trips were to Philmont, but some were not. And this experience of different backpacking venues and backpacking trips spanning over 4 decades has taught me a lot. And I want to share with you some very important lessons that I've learned over those 40 years and those 7 trips, so that you and your crew can benefit from these experiences that I've had.
Hey, real quick, right before we jump into this video, if you'd do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Also, thank you for subscribing to this channel. If you'd like to be notified of future videos, please hit that bell icon. Have a great day and enjoy this video.
In this video, I will briefly share with you these trips that I've had. I want to share with you what I've learned about myself, what I learned about our crew, and for your benefit, I want to pass on key takeaways from each of these trips. We can always learn from our past experiences, we can learn from our mistakes, and we can learn from our success stories. So stick with me through this video and allow me to share with you my experiences on scouting high adventure trips spanning these last 4 years. Remember, these are all scouting trips. These are all backpacking trips with scouts. I'm not sharing any stories or experiences related to other scouting bases like Northern Tier, nor am I going to go into any stories from a long list of experiences of doing things like backpacking and mountaineering, things I've done outside of scouts. And all of this is intended to help crews headed out to Philmont when they're choosing their itineraries. Adult advisors and crew leaders would be wise to avoid some of the mistakes that we made and learn what worked for us. For each trip, I'll give you pertinent stats that will give you a good context of what the trip was like. And then I will share with you the lessons I learned and provide key takeaways. Listen and pay attention for the recurring themes that span these 40 years. A lot's changed over 40 years, but some things have not. And with all that out of the way, let's get into this video. All right, first up on the list of trips that I want to share with you, it was 1988 in Colorado. Went to the Weminuche Wilderness outside of Durango, Silverton, Colorado. This was a really fun trip, especially for being my first high adventure trip in Scouts. We rode the train up from Durango. We stopped the train and got off the train. We would later pick the train back up and ride back into town, so that was really unique. We covered about 55 miles or so in a loop over about 6 days. It is Colorado, up in the mountains, so high alpine, pretty rugged. Rained a lot in the afternoon. I remember one of my good friends getting hypothermia after falling into a river. It was because we had some actual river crossings. I mean, actual river crossings. He crossed right in front of me, fell in. It was already raining and cold, and he fell in the river, and we got him out and got him to over to the side that we were crossing to. And immediately we had to get a fire going in the rain. We had to get him in some dry clothes, got him warmed up, but he was fine. We knew how to do that. We had a lot of experience building fires, and we had experience building fires in all kinds of weather, including rain. So we knew how to do that. which I will say a lot of scouts today don't really have that skill set anymore because we use stoves a lot to cook on. And we cooked every meal on a fire. So we had some navigational errors. I remember that. I remember, it's funny the things you remember. I remember one kid in our crew didn't want to go number 2. And so that became a problem on about day 4. I remember I didn't have the right rain gear. If you remember those old Campmore catalogs, I would look through those, and anyways, at the end of the day, I just didn't have what I needed to really stay warm and dry, and really to stay warm at night too. The sleeping bag I had was not great. Now, as a crew to prepare, we went on long weekend backpacking trips and long day hikes. And for us, any sort of elevation gain, because we lived in essentially flat territory, we just tried to find any elevation gain or loss we could, just to be going up and down hills to make it harder. And on our training hikes, of course, we learned how to work as a crew, cook as a crew, do everything as a crew. So what did I learn from this trip? Well, I learned that I did like backpacking. I did like getting up in the mountains, and I like being in the mountains. But I needed a warmer sleeping bag, a much warmer sleeping bag. I needed better rain gear, and I needed a better backpack. I learned those things, and those are all really essential things if you're going to go backpacking. So the next year, I saved all the money I got for Christmas and birthday. I did odd jobs for neighbors and friends to earn money because we didn't have a lot of money. So I just rolled up my sleeves and went to work. And I took all that money and I bought the best equipment that I could, which back in the day was all North Face equipment, because back in the day North Face actually meant something. Not so much today. But so using those lessons I learned, I acquired my new gear, started using those pieces of equipment. Of course, I couldn't buy them all at once. I had to buy them one thing at a time, starting with the sleeping bag. But I learned the value of using weekend campouts to try out gear, figure out what works, what didn't work, because I had the benefit of knowing the next summer that we would be going to Philmont. Which leads me into the second high adventure trip that I want to share with you. So this was 1989, a year later. We went to Philmont. My first time to go to Philmont. And it was my dad's dream to always go with me to Philmont, and we got to go on this trip together. So it was 1989. We almost had the exact same crew with us that went to Colorado. So we had a lot of experience in our crew from that previous trip. Okay. Now at this point, we're a year older and we had all that experience, so we're much stronger hikers and we were better prepared. And then I was better prepared because I had my new gear. And I also had tested that gear out over the previous campouts over that year, and so I had a really good idea of what the gear could do, and I knew that it should keep me just fine, warm and dry at Philmont. Now, our crew, now we're going to Philmont, so we had to choose an itinerary, just like you do today. And our itinerary that was chosen, I don't remember how we chose it. I don't remember that part. But we did end up going to the North Country. I remember we did horseback riding at Poneal, we did Sparpo climbing at Poblano, we climbed Baldy, and eventually we ended up in Harlan for shotgun shooting. And that's where my crazy bear story occurred, which I will probably share. I'm not going to share it here, but I'll probably share on a different video. Our itinerary covered about 62 miles. So roughly the same distance as our trek to Colorado, but it was fewer miles per day, and the terrain in Philmont is much easier than Colorado. And if nothing else, at least the trails for the most part of Philmont are better taken care of. Now for training, we just had a rinse and repeat of what we did for Colorado. We did backpacking over long weekends on the roughest and longest trails we could find. And since we had the wisdom of the trip to Colorado, we were also smarter in how we climbed hills, so we'd learn to pace ourselves. And most importantly, to not stop, because if you're not walking, you're not making miles, okay? So what did I learn? Well, all my preparation and gear worked out great. So the value of researching the right brands and finding the right equipment paid off. And just what I ended up buying, which was a North Face Cat's Meow 20 degree synthetic sleeping bag, kept me nice and toasty at Philmont. I ended up buying a North Face Inca Trail internal frame backpack. Internal frame backpacks at that time were really new to the scouting community, not so much for the mountaineering community. But if you were in Scouts and you had an internal frame backpack, you were different. You were 1 out of 100. Scouting just has a really hard time accepting change, especially in the way you do things, like trail runners versus boots. I'm not going to get into that saga now, but just as an example, it just takes a long time for the scouting community to accept a different way to do things. They tend to be stuck in tradition. Anyways, for a rain jacket, I bought a North Face Mountain Light rain jacket, which worked out awesome. And all this stuff back then was cutting edge. And again, it was all from the North Face. And back then, they had their roots in mountaineering. Then in 1996-ish or so, they sold their soul to corporate America and lost their cutting edge in the mountaineering community. And nowadays, everybody has North Face stuff. You can find it anywhere. It's like going to Walmart. It doesn't matter anymore. But back then, it did. It was a big deal. So anyways, what did I learn from this trip? Well, we were a strong crew. We knew how to hike. We had all that experience from our trip to Colorado that we took to Philmont. We could manage ourselves quite well on the trail. And we chose a moderately distanced itinerary, which translated into that we could get from A to B pretty efficiently. We had time to do all of our program activities. So the key takeaway was we were physically strong. We could navigate efficiently. We could efficiently manage our time and our energy level. So those are all things to remember. And those points would serve us well in future trips, or at least try to. So the next trip would be 1995, went back to Philmont. Again, I'm only talking about trips in Philmont, scouting related trips as a crew on long trips. I'm not talking about anything I did out of Scouts. Between my first trip to Philmont and my second trip to Philmont, I was doing all kinds of stuff. I was doing winter mountaineering in Colorado. I was going all over and doing all kinds of things. So when I personally got to 1995 in Philmont, I had a tremendous amount of backcountry experience, and I had all kinds of high-end gear. I was working at a high-end specialty store, if anybody remembers Neptune's in Boulder, Colorado. Kind of like that. I would say Neptune's was the pinnacle of that type of store, but it was something like that. It was a great place. So 1995 to Philmont. This would be my first trip as an adult. And I'm just going to use this opportunity to say this right now. In all these trips, we as adults, all the trips I've ever taken, we just never really consider ourselves on vacation. We may, on some trips, may not have cooked the food for the whole group because we're doing the true Philmont cooking method, but we were participating. We were engaged in what was going on. This, for the most part, was by far the strongest hiking crew that I've been a part of to date. We didn't have the benefit of having any previous backpacking trips to draw on, unlike my first trip to Philmont. Again, not me, but the crew in general. And that would kind of play a part in how this trip turned out. So this crew, I mean, we could just mentally and physically just hammer things out. I don't remember anyone whining or complaining, but we had a long trek. But we were a strong crew. I mean, the crew leader and I don't remember when we did this, but the crew leader and I, we did a 50-miler in one day. So we hiked 50 miles in less than 24 hours. So some of us were really strong and had some endurance. I remember very well being at the meeting where we chose our itinerary. And the crew, man, they want to do the longest, hardest trek that was offered that year. And I asked them, I mean, I pleaded with them pretty firmly to reconsider. The point of going to Philmont is to enjoy the program. You're paying a premium to enjoy that program. And you're not going to get that program anywhere else. And I told them, I mean, if they just want to go crush miles, we could go to Colorado and put in a lot of miles. And honestly, a place I feel like is much prettier than Philmont. But they didn't listen. They made their decision. We stuck with the longest, hardest trek there was, which was 86 miles. Literally the longest trek they offered that year. So where did we go? Well, we saw almost the entire ranch in 10 days. We walked out of base camp, kind of went south and west to Beaubien, then north up to Baldy, did Baldy, then we went up to the far northeast corner of the camp, and Indian Ridings was our last camp. So what did we learn? Well, what did they learn? 86 miles on paper feels much farther in real life. So what do I remember about the trip? Well, I remember staring at my feet a lot as we hiked around the ranch. I remember getting up really early and getting on the trail at first light. I remember hiking through afternoon thunderstorms. I remember missing almost all of our scheduled programs. So that's what I remember of this trek. Hiking all day. Fun fact though, we did have a sister crew from Switzerland and we only saw them once or twice. I'll say they were funny. They were super strong hikers. I remember them remarking about how easy all the hiking was at Philmont. I can only imagine. You're used to backpacking in the Alps, so I'm sure Philmont is absolutely nothing compared to that. Remember they did all their miles and all their program. But think of where they lived. They were young, strong, already acclimated to the altitude and backpacking in really rugged terrain in the Alps. So yeah, I'm sure Philmont was really easy. The key takeaway from this trek. Think of why you're going to Philmont. Philmont has a tremendous program to offer you. And that is a huge advantage because this is the only time you're going to get to enjoy it. The only time it's satisfying to share with someone that you're on the hardest itinerary is either on the trail or after it's all over. I want you to remember that, because if you're motivated by, we did the hardest trek there was, yeah, that's going to suck in the middle of the process. It's only going to be cool when you get to tell somebody that, and that's going to be it. You know what? Those people are going to impress for a few minutes, and then they're going to absolutely forget you and all the decisions you made. So choose wisely. We were a really strong crew. Should have chosen a shorter itinerary. Don't waste your trip to Philmont. I think that's the key takeaway. Don't waste your trip to Philmont. Costs a lot of money to go there. Might only get to go there once in your life. Go for the right reasons. 2017, we would go back to Philmont. Now, I actually didn't go on this trip. This was a crew that I was very close to. They were in our troop. I was new to the troop. But I had a lot more backpacking experience than they did, and I had been to Philmont a couple of times for summer backpacking. I've also done the winter program at Philmont too, by the way. So I put together their training hikes, and I went on all their training hikes with them, even though I wasn't going to Philmont. So I helped coach them through their itinerary selection, and they chose a moderate itinerary, which was fun because they got to see the Tooth of Time and they got to climb Baldy. So that was a lot of fun. And this was a pre-fire itinerary. So this is the fire that would be there the next year that burned out pretty much the middle of the ranch. So they got to go from hike out of base camp, they got to see the Tooth of Time and work their way up to climb Baldy, and then came out somewhere around Poneal. Now this crew was an older crew. Most of the youth were over the age of 16, and for the most part, they were pretty athletic. They did all the pre-trip training that we did when I was younger, because I put together their training program. They would say that all paid off. One of the challenges they had on this crew was it was hard to get everybody to be present on most, even half of the training hikes, and that would be a problem because they couldn't all get on the same page. So it took them several days at Philmont to kind of get in sync, again, because they were all busy and training for Philmont wasn't a priority for them. So remember that. They did do the Philmont cooking method. Would tell you that they had a great time and they enjoyed their trip. Some of the adults were out of shape and they struggled a lot. So remember that. But the kids were fine. In 2020, I took a crew to Colorado. We were supposed to go to Philmont, but due to COVID, Philmont was closed. So we switched our plans and we went to Colorado. This by far was the most rewarding trip I've had so far. It was also the most difficult by far, physically speaking, but the most rewarding. We took the kids to the Maroon Bells Wilderness outside of Snowmass, Colorado. We hiked about 75 miles over 9 days. As a part of that, we did the famous 4-pass loop on that trip. The average campsite elevation we had was 11,000 feet. So if you don't know how high that is, if you've ever climbed Baldy, when you climb out of the trees to go up the final push to the summit of Baldy, right there at tree line, that's 11,000 feet or so. That's where we were camping every night. Okay, so every day we would be up about 12,000 to 14,000 feet all day, and we'd go back down to 11,000 feet to get the tree line to camp at night. Every day, at least once, we climbed the equivalent of Baldy with full packs on. Every day, at least once. It was beautiful because we were above tree line the whole time. It was like being in the Alps. There was snow. We hiked through snow. It was just absolutely gorgeous. We had snowball fights. We made snow cones. We had a blast. And the activity was backpacking. There's no program like at Philmont, so there was nothing manufactured for our entertainment. The enjoyment was seeing the beautiful terrain pass by every day. And the scouts would, not at the beginning, but about halfway through the trip, they would start having comments like, wow, that's really pretty. That's really beautiful. So that was rewarding. It was also rewarding to see the kids grow up a lot over that trip. So this would be a fun story. Probably I'll share more details about this trip at some other point, but it was a lot of fun. Key takeaway here. For training, we didn't really crush a lot of miles. We really just spent our time practicing navigation and our camping skills. As adults, we made sure that we were physically fit. But the kids, for the most part, they weren't necessarily athletic. There were a lot of kids that would be National Merit Scholars, really, really smart guys. So mentally, they were really, really tough. So moderately fit kids can do way more than they think they can. They just need to pace themselves, and they need to manage their time and navigation. The value of not making a wrong turn is really important. We made one wrong turn on day 2 that took about 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes, actually not that long to figure out we had made a wrong turn. And then we made another wrong turn that same morning that took us about 15 minutes to figure out we were going the wrong way. But that hour of lost time literally took us 2 days to make up. So those little wrong turns killed us for about 2 days. Also learned to manage our energy and pace, which is a key takeaway. So the fact that we didn't crush a lot of miles in our training didn't make any difference. What we needed to do more of was practice navigation, and we did great on our camping skills because we practiced that. All right, 2022, Philmont. We actually sent 2 crews to Philmont this year. We sent one crew that I was not on, and the other crew I was an adult advisor on. Although I helped train both crews and we did the same training evolutions. So what we did for training was we spent almost all of our time doing navigation exercises. All right. Remember that trip from Colorado. All right. And then we spent a lot of time camping as a group, and we made sure we camped when it was extremely cold. We made sure we hiked when it was raining and the weather was not nice. Anybody hike when it's nice? You gotta learn how to hike when it's not nice and camp when it's not nice. So we got very proficient at navigation and doing things in hard weather. Any hikes we did not do long hikes, but anything we did was in support of learning navigation. We did not do any long, hard training hikes as in the previous years. And we rightly assumed that most of the kids were decently physically fit. And they were. I would say they were normal kids. They were some were athletes for sure, but most were not. They were just super smart, uber smart kids that mentally were really strong. They were all mentally strong. And as adults, we just all individually worked on our physical fitness level. And we could rest assured that as adults, we had enough self-discipline to make sure we were extremely physically fit. Now, specifically for the 2022 Philmont crew that I did not go on, I would say that crew was like a typical crew headed to Philmont. So they were the boys were in moderately physically fit, but they were not necessarily athletes. Some were. I would say they were all mentally tough. And because they were all disciplined and they knew how to dig in mentally and just keep going. They didn't quit. So that's a takeaway right there. That crew did not have any benefit of any previous backpacking trip. So this group did not go to Colorado. All right, so this was their first backpacking trip, which was going to Philmont. So I would say this crew was pretty much just like almost every crew going to Philmont. They chose a medium to easy itinerary, and this allowed them to enjoy their program. But it did give them some days that ended up being long in miles, which turned into hiking in the cold rain some afternoons. But overall, they enjoyed their trip, although some parts of it sucked. This crew used the Philmont cooking method and our troops' group water filtering system, which we have the Platypus Gravity Waterworks. So they didn't take anything weird to Philmont. So key takeaways I'd say this crew was just about like every other crew going. They had no previous experience going backpacking. They were all in decent physical fitness, but I would not necessarily call them athletes. The adults made sure they were good to go. They had decent navigational skills. They had great camping skills. We learned the need for long, hard training hikes wasn't necessarily needed. What was important is they worked as a crew, and they were proficient at navigation and their camping skills. Being in cold, wet training environments was also very helpful. But overall, they were a normal crew going to Philmont, no backpacking experience, no outstanding physical fitness studs, but mentally, they were really, really tough, and they didn't quit. So I think that's a key takeaway. So let's talk about the other crew that we sent to Philmont in 2022, my crew. So for the most part, everybody going on this trek had been to Colorado 2 years earlier. Or they had been to Philmont in 2017, and we'd been to Northern Tier for the most part. So we all had a lot of experience backpacking and being on high adventure trips. Most of us were extremely physically fit. And we were all really, really good at navigation, especially since we'd been to Northern Tier. Navigation at Northern Tier compared to Philmont is a lot more difficult. I don't recall us making a single wrong navigational error. So anytime we had a question, we would stop, figure it out, then make the right choice, and it always worked out. They made the right choice. The youth made all those choices. Okay. We all knew how to hike. We could put in some miles if we wanted to, and we could do that without being exhausted because we were proficient at hiking. We were proficient at navigation. We were proficient at camping skills. I would say we were a high-speed, low-drag crew, if you know what that means. Okay, we were the anomaly at Philmont, not the norm. Going to Philmont was going to be a really easy trip for us, probably no matter what we did, but we were the exception, not the rule. We took a much different approach to our cooking and watering filtering needs based upon my experience, our experience collectively at Colorado and the issues we had there, which really weren't issues, it was just how to tweak things, and my exhaustive backpacking experience on other trips outside of Scouts. We elected to, and overall a general theme with Scouts is we do not teach our Scouts how to go do things like backpacking on their own. Because when you get out of, everything in Scouts is a group effort. When you get out of Scouts, it's not a group effort. You're doing things on your own. So as a general trend in Scouts, we don't teach skills or equipment that helps Scouts bridge from Scouts to going and doing backpacking on their own outside of Scouts. We do not do that very well at all. So to change that, we took everything, all the knowledge that I had backpacking, and we elected to bring our own personal cook and water filtration systems. So everybody had their own water filter, everybody had their own stove, and I'm going to save all this discussion for another video, but it was really wise that we did this. I remember back, if you remember way back, the first crew that I discussed, we talked about going to the Weminuche Wilderness. Fun fact, my best friend and I, we were in the same troop together. We, as seniors, our senior trip, we decided to go redo that exact same trip with a couple of friends that were not in Scouts. But that experience played into this. Again, as scouts, we're not really great at giving our kids skills that help them go backpacking on their own. You think of the Philmont cooking method. That is a group cooking method that in no way is going to translate into you taking those skills, for example, and going hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. That's absolutely worthless experience at Philmont. So you're starting over, basically. So, all that being said, I reached out to the Philmont leadership, and we developed an alternative cooking method that we could use. So, that being said, I'm going to try to keep this short and concise. When we showed up to Philmont with our alternative cooking method that we had worked for months with high up Philmont staff to approve, that became a huge obstacle to our ranger and the ranger staff. And that led to all sorts of issues in base camp with the rangers. And it was heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. But you know, Philmont has their way of doing things, and the people most indoctrinated in that way are the rangers. And they just had a real hard time with it. Our ranger eventually got over it, and we went on and started our trip. But it was a lot more drama than we needed while we were in base camp. So if you're planning on taking an alternative cooking method to Philmont, make sure it's rock solid and you know exactly what you're doing and how that's going to work at Philmont. I had the benefit of that because I'd worked for months and months previous to that with Philmont leadership. That just didn't necessarily translate down to the rangers. Hopefully that's all changed by now. So this, again, was a crew with... that was very, very strong. Very strong. Okay. So they listened somewhat and chose an extremely easy itinerary. We only hiked like 50 miles or so. We probably could have hiked, well, I know we could have hiked a lot more miles, but remember that middle of the ranch was burned out and you're either going to the North Country or the South Country, so you really just couldn't cover a lot of miles. I'm not starting to change now, but there really weren't a lot of treks that would go from north to south. They had a great brainstorming session. They figured out an itinerary they all liked, and they did that trek. Okay? So the big deal was doing program. The other great thing was they had done a much, much tougher trek at Colorado. This was going to be much more like a vacation for them. They didn't need to prove anything to anyone else about what they could do because most of them had been to Colorado. They had done an extremely difficult trek before. Rewarding, but difficult. Now, what did we learn? Well, we did all the program we wanted to do. The boys got to lay around a lot in the afternoon in camp and hang out while it was raining. We were done hiking all of our miles pretty much every day before lunch. Unless we had the burro. That's a different story in a different video. But many days the boys would get themselves up unprompted and we would be on the trail at first light. And there were times when we would arrive at our destination camp before the camp staff had finished their breakfast. Which meant they got their first pick of campsites, they got their first pick of program times. Philmont is a very time-centric place. If you're first, you get first choice. If you're last, you get whatever's left over. This also meant they could have side-hiked to a lot of other camps, done a lot of other program, but you know what? They didn't. So we just sat around and lounged a lot. I'm glad we brought 2 dining flies, which is another takeaway. We had 1 dining fly for the kids. We didn't use the Philmont dining flies. We brought our own ultralight dining flies. About the same size as the Philmont dining flies, but the kids had one and we had one. So there was plenty of room to sit around in a chair and relax while the other crews walked around and camp in the afternoon thunderstorms. So the key takeaway, we were a really strong, experienced crew. We were the anomaly. They chose an easy itinerary. Probably too easy, but that was their choice. Inversely, rather than one of my previous trips to Philmont that we discussed, we had a very strong crew that chose the hardest itinerary, and that trip sucked. No memories. Not many memories, except for watching the world pass by at my feet. On this trip, however, we had a great trip, full of memories, because we got to do all the program we wanted. We got to stay well within our physical limits. Would say our alternative approach to cooking and water filtration was a huge disappointing problem with the Ranger staff. And I'm going to save this for another video, but I was never so grateful to get out of base camp and that circus. But we had a really fun trip. We just had a blast. High performing crew, for sure. So in closing, I had lots of memories of scouting trips as a youth and as an adult. Lots of wisdom gained overall and all that experience. These trips would springboard me from doing trips in Scouts to going off and doing high adventure trips on my own, which would lead to going to Colorado on my own, going to the mountains on my own, going backpacking on my own, going winter mountaineering. Like, for example, going to Rocky Mountain National Park in the middle of January, February, and climbing Long's Peak, or going skiing the Alpine Road. Just Scouts got me into that world. All that experience. So I bring to this video experience as a perspective from the youth. I remember what it's like to go on backpacking trips as a youth, as a young adult, going as an adult advisor. And I certainly remember going as an older adult. High adventure trips are an amazing opportunity for the youth. And I would think for most adults to prove to yourself that you can do way more than you think you can. And they're a unique opportunity to learn a lot about yourself. And really rewarding as an adult is to watch the youth grow up right in front of you over the course of a trip. You get a front row seat. And honestly, you'll be in a position to watch them grow in ways their parents don't get an opportunity to. They're under stress. You get to learn how they manage stress. You get to help coach them through that. You'll get to watch them grow facial hair for some of them. I've never seen these kids at 14 with a mustache. That's unique. But you get to do that over 10 days. You get an opportunity to just see all kinds of great things and to make lifelong friendships. I will say, though, that there are youth and sometimes adults out there that, mentally quit on themselves and therefore the crew. And people tend, short of an injury, people tend to mentally quit a long time before they're physically just can't do something anymore. Probably should make a video about all that. Okay, but overall, all this experience from these high adventure trips, to be concise, what I've learned is of course, the ideal training would be kind of like my last crew to Philmont that I was on. I mean, for us going to Philmont, we knew this going into it. Going to Philmont was going to be no big deal. This was truly going to be a vacation. We knew we could crush a lot of miles if we had to, and we were going to not do any of that. I think our longest day was like 7 miles, 8 miles, and we were done with that, including doing about 2 hours worth of program by like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So we could get around. But overall, yeah, the ideal training would be to go live and hike an environment where going to Philmont is not going to be any big deal. So you would live at altitude, you would hike at altitude. You know, think of the Switzerland crew like, this is no big deal. I'm sure it's not. You know, but for most crews, that's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. You don't have a place to go do that. Do you need long training hikes to just slog it out, do a lot of miles? No. You do, more importantly, need a lot of mental endurance, though. You need to be able to just kind of tuck yourself back in and in your brain and just hammer it out. So you do need that. Mentally, you need that. And if long training hikes gives people in your crew or your crew the ability to just kind of tuck in and push it out, then maybe you do. But overall, no. No, you don't need to go just do a lot of miles just for the sake of doing a lot of miles. Certainly not at the sacrifice of getting proficient at your camping and navigational skills. So your navigational skills are way more important. Because I don't care how many miles you can do in a day. If you are going the wrong direction, you are not making any miles going the right way. And you're just going to be that much more tired. Okay? If it takes you a long time to get set up for camp and cook and break down for camp, that's just more energy, more time that you're taking out of your ability to do other things at Philmont. Of course, this is assuming everybody's in decent physical shape. But I think most youth today, certainly there are exceptions, but they're in decent physical shape. Better shape than you might think they are, if you can pace yourself. And they're mentally tough. So being mentally tough, having grit, being able to dig in and just get it done and grind it out, okay, is way more important than being a super stud athlete. And a lot of super stud athletes, actually, that athleticism comes easy for them, and they don't know what it's like to really have to push themselves mentally. Just saying. So I'd rather take a crew full of nerds in decent physical shape than a bunch of super stud athletes that they've never had to push themselves mentally, because you're going to get mentally challenged on a high adventure trip. And that's what separates the ones that finish from those that don't. So, in my order of priority, if I could pass this on to you, navigational skills are really important. Your camping skills are really important. Obviously, know how to hike. You need to have your backpack dialed in, but that's really what training hikes are for. Do you need long, just slogging it out training hikes just for the physical effort of doing it? No, because 20 miles on flat terrain is like 4 miles in the mountains. It doesn't really mean much. Now, if you can practice in the Appalachia where you're actually climbing miles, yeah, that helps. You learn those skills, you learn how to pace yourself, sure. Yeah, but really navigation and your camping skills, being efficient at getting up, breaking down camp, getting out of camp. When you get to camp, being able to cook efficiently, hang your bear bags, get all those things done so that you're not wasting time doing those things, so you can get in as much program as possible. So I think overall, most crews would benefit from going to Philmont by choosing a slightly easier trek than they think they can do. So if your crew is in decent physical shape and you want to do a trek that's in 60 mile-ish, that's fine. 6 miles is a long way for if you're not used to doing it. If you're from Switzerland, 6 miles at Philmont is not going to be that big of a deal, so you can choose whatever you want. But again, that's the exception, not the rule. So I think the most successful trips I've had were we did program. You're paying a premium to go to Philmont and have the program. Do the program. No one's going to care that you crushed a lot of miles. Now, if you've got to do miles to get to the program, you got to make sure that you can do those miles efficiently so you can do the program. But you do not want to take a trek where you're just hiking all day. If you want to do that, go somewhere else. Don't waste all that money at Philmont if you're just going to hike all day. Do the program at Philmont. It's the only place you'll get to do it and go backpacking. So I hope you learned something from this video. I hope somewhere in here there are little nuggets of wisdom to help you maybe choose an appropriate itinerary for your crew. But I hope that you have a great trip to Philmont. And with that, have a blessed day.
Hey, I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you'd like to support this channel, remember, please subscribe to this channel. Tell your friends about it. Thanks for hitting that like button. Everything here is free. I want to give back to the community. I want to give to you everything here for free. I've been out in the outdoors for a long, long time, and it's great that I can be able to give all this information to you. That is what's most important to me. If you would like to give back, I do have a GoFundMe page set up, and you can follow the link. And if you'd like to, if you're a youth with your parents' support, I would gladly accept your donations. Thank you and have a blessed day.